Welcome to The Explainer. You know, sometimes a single question posted online can just explode. And that's exactly what we're looking at today, a heated local debate that shows just how tangled faith, community, and politics can really get.
So, this is it. This is the question that kicked the whole thing off. A resident in Chino Hills, California, put this out there in an online forum, and wow, the answers that came flooding in, they were passionate, they were divisive, and they were deeply personal. It really paints a picture of a community wrestling with a major rift.
Okay, so let's dive into the first major theme that popped up again and again in this conversation, and that is power and politics. For a lot of residents, this wasn't some minor issue. No, this was the central issue.
And people weren't just vague about it. They pointed to really specific things. Take this alleged social media post, for example. It's about celebrating control over the local school board, the Chino Valley Unified School District. For critics, this was just a huge slap in the face, a move from spiritual guidance to what they called political gloating.
And from there, the allegations got even more specific. You had commenters saying the church was straight up violating its 501c3 tax-exempt status. You know, that rule that says they can't be directly endorsing political candidates. They talked about money being funneled to candidates, endorsements happening right there during services, and letting political figures like Charlie Kirk speak, turning it into a political rally, not a Sunday service.
So you might be asking, how does all this alleged political activity actually translate into real power? Well, according to the critics, it all comes down to one thing: block voting. The idea is pretty simple, right? When you have a large, organized group that all votes the same way, they can have a massive impact on local elections, especially if not a lot of other people are turning out to vote.
And then you get claims like this one, which really shows you the level of suspicion we're talking about. A user alleged the church collected 20,000 ballots. Now, we have to be clear, this is an unverified claim. But whether that number is real or not, it tells you everything you need to know about the deep distrust some residents have about the church's role in local elections.
Okay, but this whole thing wasn't just about who's winning elections. For a lot of people, the frustration was much deeper. It was personal. It was about the social and, the religious fabric of their town.
And wow, the language here is just intense. You don't have to read between the lines. When you see comments like this, it's clear as some people don't just disagree with the church. They see it as something actively harmful to the community, calling it an extremist cult and arguing it shouldn't get tax-exempt status at all. And here's where it gets really interesting. This points to a major tension in this whole debate, because some of the sharpest, most pointed criticism didn't come from outsiders. It came from other people who also identify as Christians. They felt that the church's actions just went against the very teachings of their own faith.
And think about the impact of that for a second. It's gotten to the point where some Christians in the area feel like they have to go out of their way to say, hey, just so you know, I'm not from that church. That's huge. It shows you how this conflict is actually reshaping what it even means to be a Christian in that community.
But of course, this was not a one-sided takedown. Not at all. It's really important to see that a lot of people jumped in to defend the church, or at the very least to say, hey, it's not that simple. They offered a completely different take on its role in the community.
And one of the strongest arguments in its defense was this one right here. For this person, the church was a breath of fresh air during the COVID-19 pandemic. From their point of view, Calvary Chapel wasn't being divisive, it was providing comfort and community when people were scared and isolated. It was a lifeline.
And this really gets to the heart of the whole conflict, doesn't it? On one hand, you have people saying the church is illegally politicking, breaking the rules of its tax-exempt status. But on the other hand, you have people saying, hold on, they're just citizens exercising the right to free speech. They can endorse whoever they want, just like any other group. And the community is just completely split on this. And then, of course, you've got the people who were just caught in the middle of all the shouting. This commenter basically said, I have a headache from all the noise. They felt the people opposing the church were getting a little too extreme, too. It's a great reminder that not everyone sees this as a clear-cut good versus evil battle. For some, it's just two loud, exhausting sides. So, okay, you've got these deep, deep divisions. What happens next? Where do you go from here? Well, for those who are critical of the church's influence, the conversation pretty quickly shifted from just venting to actually making a plan. They started strategizing for the next election.
And they came up with this pretty clear three-step game plan. See, their theory is that the church's political power doesn't come from being all-powerful,
but from what they called everyone else's apathy. So the solution isn't to silence the church, it's to wake everybody else up and get them to vote.
But how do you actually do that? How do you motivate people who just aren't paying attention? Well, one user had an idea. You have to give them the why. The thinking here is to make it about their wallets, to connect the church's political activities directly to taxpayer money, pointing to things like past lawsuits, and say, look, this is actually costing.
And in the end, this whole messy, passionate local debate really comes down to one big fundamental question, not just for Chino Hills, but for any community. Where do you draw the line between a group being actively engaged in their community and that group having what some would call too much political control? For the people of Chino Hills, that's not a rhetorical question. It's the very real debate they're living through right now.